You're muted again.
Thank you. Okay, so I said I spent a lot of time the last several days trying to prepare a parsha shir, and I completely failed. What I want to spend is maybe 5 to 10 minutes so that we have something parsha related, explaining what I was trying to do and how it failed, and then I'll move on to the main topic of this year, which is a particular tshuva, which I think is at the very least interesting as a work of art, and might also have important things to teach us. So the thing I was trying to work at is really a fellow named Josh Stadlan in Cambridge wrote a wonderful Dvar Torah a number of weeks ago, which took the following approach. He's bothered, as many people are, by the exclusion of Kohanim with physical blemishes from avoda in the Beis Hamikdash. Now, some of those issues are solvable in terms of Birkat Kohanim, right? We know that Birkat Kohanim, the way the Gemara says that a certain number of blemishes, and really Bali Mum are not puzzled for it, and the Gemara talks about how you can. The issue with Birkat Kohanim is, at least for most things, is whether they distract people or not, and so you can create a culture in which people's unusual characteristics, non-normative characteristics, whatever you want to call them, are not in any way distracting to the community, and so you can do that, right? The Gemara says that if you're dash biro, so people no longer notice it, then that's fine, and we can say nowadays, Benny Lau was I think the one who formulated this primarily, but I also heard it from Professor Michael Stein of Harvard in Harvard Law in a totally different environment in terms of the International Treaty on Disabilities, that you can frame it as, okay, if it happens that it's not that it becomes usual, so then it changes the law, or you can say that our goal is to proactively set out to create a society where that where ideally where if it's disability, the category disability disappears because you create a structure where whatever that physical difference is has no consequences in terms of ability. Professor Stein's mashal was in a world where everything is entirely flat. Wheels are an advantage, not a disadvantage, and so people are using wheelchairs are not disabled. They're probably better abled for many purposes. So you want to avoid steps and build ramps and do things like that so that so there's no effect. But that doesn't work in terms of the actual avoda in the Beit HaMikdash. There's a list of physical characteristics that are exclusive. There was a famous attempt again by Rabbi Lau to try and claim that there's a halachic solution to that. Laniyut Dati and many people more important than me, that attempt failed. But Josh tried something I think clever. What he said was that we have a tradition that the firstborns, right, the Bechor served as the Kohanim prior to the Kohanim, and that's in this week's parsha, where again, right, there are many times where it happens. They have to try and figure out where the Levium or the Kohanim in some way replace the Bechors, and there is a tradition in which, in Messianic times, it reverts to the Bechors. So the question then is, if you construct the shift to the Kohanim as a response to a sin, let's say the Egel HaZahav, so maybe you can say that the exclusion of Kohanim Bali Mum is part of the same transition from the firstborn to the Kohanim, and so when the Kuna reverts from what we now call Kohanim to the Bechorim, maybe there will no longer be a psula Bali Mum either. So the question then is, but do you know whether a Bechor who was a Bal Mum could have served as a Kohen prior to what we call the Kohanim taking over? So Josh tried a way of doing that, which was borrowing from somebody else, and I think was based on a translation error in an unusual phrase, an understandable translation error. It was a clever move where the idea was to claim that there is a medrash which suggests that the impact of slavery in Egypt was enormous in terms of physical results on Bnei Yisrael. And if you had a medrash that said that every member of the Jewish people was a halachic Baal Mum, was halachically blemished, coming in a way that was presumably in a way that was relevant to the Guna, that's a reasonable reading of what Bali Mum means in that medrash. So that would mean that the Bechors were also, and since we have a position that the Bechors did the avoda up until the inauguration of the Mishkan, so that would mean that if every Jew was the Baal Mum, and right, so that included the Bechors, and that means that Bechors who were Kohanim must have Bechors who were Bali Mum must have served as Kohanim. You could claim it proves too much because there are some things that when everybody has them, right, maybe that changes halacha, but that would be a chiddush. So it was a really good argument if, in fact, the Medrash said that all of Bnei Yisrael were. But I think there isn't actually such a Medrash. I think that the most you can get is one that says nearly all. You can't get one that actually says all. So I didn't think that. I thought that the final point in Josh Sadlan's Vartura didn't quite make it. But I thought maybe there's another way of proving it. So I try. So I suggested you might be able to try to prove it by counting what exactly the ratio of Bechoras to, right, how many Bechoras needed Pidyon to be replaced by Kohanim. And I was trying, so I spent a lot of time in the last day and a half just trying to see if I could find any direct evidence for the question of whether a Bechor who is a Baal Mum was allowed to do the Avoda or would be allowed to do the Avoda in the Beit HaMikdash. And so far I've come up completely empty, and maybe I'm missing something entirely obvious. So you understand what I was trying to get to. And I, just say, boldly, I failed. If any of you find Makara to that effect, one way or the other, either proving that a Bechor who was a Baal Mum could or will be able to serve, or couldn't and won't be able to, I would appreciate it. Okay, that's the end of the parsha related section. What I want to do here is share with you, I guess, a dangerously speculative history, and I'm going to have to try and figure out myself, right? So I'm going to say up front, right, what I'm saying is dangerously speculative. I don't know that it's true. I'm just going to read the first part with you. I'll tell you what my wild speculation is, and then we'll follow that truth and we'll see what you make of it. We'll figure out exactly what order we do it in as we go along. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Items already. Okay, so this should be here. Okay, so we're going to start with a tshuva, which, so far as I can tell, is undated in the database of Israeli Batidin Tshuvot. And I'm going to tell you up front that it's likely that this tshuva will make you very upset. I'm going to say that up front. So here's the case. Nasei Adiyun, Gveret Echad, right? So a particular woman, the vacation in Beit Din l'shachrer ota me'aginuta. She wants the Beit Din to free her from her being an aguna. Acharei shebala shenis'a lo kedat Moshe v'Yisrael b'Rabbanut ha'aretz. After her husband, whom she married in a way which the court assumes is unbreakable, you can't challenge the marriage itself, in an official Israeli rabbinate system. Ne'elam, and he's gone. Veinenu, and is no longer present with us. Miyad lachar chatuna, right? He left immediately after the wedding. Kishu lokech ito kol hamatanot shekiblu b'chatuna, taking with him all their wedding presents. Kol hachipusim acharav lo he'elu davar. All the searches after him produced nothing. L'ta'anata, according to her opinion, itbarer lanu shabal. It became clear to her that her husband, Shutoshav Chutz, who's not an Israeli citizen, who, I'm not sure how to pronounce this word, Nochel, right, it's a criminal, Nochel Sidrati, a serial criminal. Shekvar kama palim nasa nashim b'chutz la'aretz. He already several times married women in chutz la'aretz. B'chasunos mefuarot, in beautiful weddings. V'ne'alam lachar ha'chasunot im ha'matanot, and immediately, each time, he disappears after the wedding with the gifts. Bari lo, right, it's clear to her, she's absolutely certain. Had she known about this, she would never have married such a criminal. Not only that, look, according to his habit, right, he in fact disappeared immediately after the wedding. Right, so it's not enough to say. Right, there's two issues. One is, had she known that he would disappear right after the wedding, she wouldn't have married him. Right, as far as it sounds like the wedding is not even consummated. And secondly, suppose he would stay with her, but he's still this scum. So she makes both claims. A, if I had known his history, I would never have married him. And B, anyway, I didn't really ever get to marry him at all. But she didn't know anything because he lived abroad. Okay. So that's our right there. So the question is asking, and this is the question that raises so much contemporary controversy, is can you undo a marriage on the claim that I know first what I know now? If I'd known then what I know now, I would never have I would never have married him. We call it mekach ta'udis, the equivalent of a transaction in which you were misled about the merchandise. So all the questions, if the standard questions are raised, but here are the questions, right? What's the standard under which you can, in a commercial case, invalidate a sale on the grounds that you were misled? What happens if there's something that was known in the place of the seller, but the buyer doesn't know about it? Do we say that the buyer, it was known in the place of the seller and the buyer didn't know about it? Does the buyer have an obligation to do due diligence? And the presumption is that you investigated since it was knowable, or do we say that no, sellers only have an obligation to do due diligence in their own place and not someplace else? And maybe that changes because of the internet. This, I think, my suspicion is that this tshuva is old enough that simply Googling a person was not likely to yield that kind of result. Granting that that this is the kind of case that would meet the, we know the standards for mekach ta'ud generally, and we assume that it's not, that the possibility of claiming mekach ta'ud is not eliminated by the fact that it was known where he came from. So, do we think that that women would never marry a serial criminal if they didn't if they didn't know about it? And then, what about the specific case where it's not just a serial criminal, but it's a serial criminal who left as soon as the kedushin was done with all the gifts? Okay, we're not going to go through all the issues in detail. We will note that one oddity is that it seems that there are 4 judges writing Shuvot on this panel. There's Rabbi Avram Levine, Rabbi Mordechai Eichler, Rabbi Chaim Shalom Dam, I think, and Rabbi Yeshua Weiss. So let's start with Rabbi Levine's Shuvah. So he goes through all these issues in order. That was his outline. At the end, he says, in a manner where it becomes clear that the husband is a serial criminal who left immediately after the wedding with the gifts. In such a manner, she didn't have a husband even for a moment to stay with him, even for a day, right? So the halachic argument that is usually made against a woman's claim of mekach ta'ud is a version of a statement tav l'meitav tandu, which implies that at its extreme version, that you could make the argument that it meant that even a momentary marriage with a terrible man would be enough, if you actually got some kind of physical pleasure out of it. Let's leave aside whether that's a plausible reading or not. Here, she didn't even get that, right? So he says, look, in this case, right? So he says, "Lo hirgisha tav l'meitav tandu." So whatever your arguments are for saying that presumptively women would agree to a marriage, that doesn't apply to this case at all. So you can say that all the standard controversies about whether you can apply mekach ta'ud for women don't apply to this case. Because for this kind of husband, there's no circumstances under which this woman would have agreed to marry this man. And look, you can't, the fact that she didn't do everything she could to find out in the United States doesn't mean that she forgave it. It just means that there are just, people don't really consider that possibility. Okay, so now we're great. It sounds like it should be mutter, and then he ends. Eliam came no market dasagrach, unless we say, like Rav Chaim, I think it's Rav Chaim he's talking about. So there is this svara that maybe kedushin is an act of the man, and therefore the man can put conditions on it, but women are not active in the kedushin role, and therefore they can't put conditions on it. This is a very strange idea, which in other tshuvot is mentioned and discarded. But here he mentioned, after going through doing all the hard work of establishing the case, he then says, unless we say like the graph, and if we hold like the graph, so then women's ta'ud can't invalidate the kedushin that way. It's tzarich iyun, and it requires investigation. That's a really weird way to end a tshuva about naguna. It's tzarich iyun. Tzarich iyun is the same for women as you're trapped. And it's just so weird that he does all this work. He does really all the hard work. It's not hard to reject the claim that women can't put conditions on marriage, right? Many tshuvot have been written establishing that there are people who take that position, but it shouldn't be the roadblock after you've done all the other work that he's done, right? To get rid of tav l'meitav and to establish mekach ta'ud in general. But that's what he does. Okay. Then we get a second tshuva, which I think is from Rav Shmuel Chaim Dom. Here's what he says. Regarding what my friend the Av Beit Rabbi Levin wrote in terms of Bittul Kiddushin because of Mekach Tos and all the Achronim about this, take a look at the book Beit Yaakov to Lagon Rav Yaakov, and it's written here Yaakov Harif Yosef. There's a whole debate. This is Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, the famous first chief rabbi of New York. So you take a look in the work in the book Beit Yaakov. Rashi Rav Kol Harishon Shel America, who was he was supposed to be the first chief rabbi of America, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef. Right, many stories explaining about why that failed. And it was previously the Maggid Ben Shuram in Vilna and the Talmidei Rabbanu Israel Salanter, right? So this was a major figure, which was reprinted in 5762. The Sham Besofo Bechelek Hashut, right? So this is an esoteric book. Amud Tav Samach, Kuva Uvda Shaita Binyan Lichora Mekachtos, Kein Uvda Dinyan Didan. So in the back of that book, there's a story which sounds a lot like our story. The Sham Besofo Bechelek, Below Helu Sham B'Yudam Lahatir B'Shum Mekachtos. And nobody there ever raised the question of Mekachtos, even though it's the case that sounds just like our case. V'dana Sham Lahachshir, V'docha K'V'Di'eved, Get Shenasan Haba La'achar Zman Rav. So instead, what they do is they validate after with great difficulty and only if there's no other choice, a get that the husband gave a long time later, which had a mistake in the name of the woman. Right, a get has to have the names precisely. This get had a mistake, and they come up with a very difficult argument to validate the get. But nobody ever raises the issue of mekachos in that case. And the people involved in the case were Hagon Hanal, that's Rav Yaakov Yosef, Hagon Rav Moshe Zivitz, Av Beitin of Pittsburgh, the Chaber of the Sefer Mashpiach and the Yerushalmi, which includes a wonderful Askama from the Chavetz Chaim, right? So this is all being built up authority. The Hagon Rav Yitzchak Lochanan Zal, Rav Yitzchak Lochanan Spector, who is the rabbi for all Aguna issues in the late 19th century. So his argument is there is this story in this book Beit Yaakov where these three great figures of the late 19th century, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, Rabbi Yitzchak Chanan Spector, and Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Zivitz of Pittsburgh, all engaged with a case just like ours, and they never raised the question of mekachtos. So obviously, the case of mekachtos is not relevant. So he's going to tell you, look, here's the case. Can you decide what the case is like? This is the name of the question. To Roshab, the previously mentioned of Shabtai had a sister, and her name was Shprinza. Boston, Mass. Okay, and the sister of this man named Shabtai, his name's Shprinza, and she was a servant in the house of a man in Boston, Massachusetts. The cuffs al yad $300 bidei achia Reb Shabtai, and she collected $300 and gave them to her brother Reb Shabtai. So he gives the money to me to do chesed, but he's not giving it to Mitzvah because he's holding it for his sister. He's saying you can use this as a cash reserve for your free loan fund, but you're responsible for the money because I have to return it to my sister. And one day this Rav Shabtai, who gave me his sister's $300 to use for various chesed purposes, but not to use up, comes to me with a young man, Yefei Torah, who's very handsome, and he is learned in all fields, right? He knows all sorts of professional fields. So I asked this man who's along with Rav Shabtai, I don't know why. What are you doing? What are you doing in this land? And he said to me, "You mazkir be'office a millionaire Carnegie hayadua." He is a secretary in the office of Andrew Carnegie, presumably. Who's $50 l'shavua, and his salary is $50 a week. Now we are, we'll discover afterwards, we are somewhere around the year 5650. So we're in the 1880s, right? This is being written in 1888. The case may have happened sometime before. We're in Pittsburgh, right, which I think is where Andrew Carnegie is headquartered. So this is all a reasonable thing. With Tochat Varim, And in the midst of the story, a young woman shows up. Vayomer Rav Shabtai now, and Rav Shabtai shows up and he says, Zos anara hi achuti. This is my sister. V'zeha elim hu echatana shirla. And this, that should not be Hashem, right? And this, right? And this, this boy, this lad, he's her fiance. And I stood in shock. As handsome as he was, she was the opposite. So Rabbi Zev looks at it and he says, "This seems to me an unlikely marriage. Here you have a young man who's has all the skills and he's amazingly handsome, and he should have he should be able to pick whoever he wants, and he marries someone who doesn't seem to be up to his style. Okay. Shalti et piv im yeshli krovimpo. Right? Of course, obviously, he could be missing something, and right, and Rav Shabtai's sister could be the most amazing person on earth, and maybe he's missing, maybe his taste is different, but Rabbi Zivitz at this point is comfortable with his evaluation, but he wants to check. So I asked the young man, im yeshli krovimpo, do you have any relatives here in Pittsburgh? But Yarmali ain't li shum krov. He says, no, I am alone in the world. Shalti et od kamas manu dar po here. I said, how long have you been here? And he said, a month. So I turned and stage whispered, I guess, I don't know, to Rav Shabtai. You better check after this young man a lot. You better investigate thoroughly. I think he's one of these wicked people who plan to catch Jewish women in their net and leave them in the chains of Igun and to steal all their money. Okay, couldn't ask for a clear warning of that. Amnam. But this Ramay, he had really, right, this trickster, he had charm, verbal charm, and so he overcame my claim. And in the end, I had to do the wedding. And I said, I want to take invalid witnesses. I want to deliberately create a way to invalidate the wedding. So that I would have space to permit her after he abandons her. But I did not succeed in doing this. Rav Shabtai, either I told him explicitly or he figured it out, or he just looked at the witnesses I was picking and he said, look at that guy. I know that guy's a professional gambler, right? And that one's right, and that one's a mobster. I had no way out. I had to do the wedding. And as I imagined, happened. The next day, the husband disappears, and nobody knows where his footsteps are. And now there are days and months, and his sister comes crying to her brother, saying, "Right, why didn't you listen to the rabbi and to his warning?" Okay, and then you can look at the tshuva of the tshuva Harizik Elchanan, and you'll see what he wrote. Okay, so this is an utterly amazing thing. This is an utterly amazing thing. First of all, the case sounds wild. It seems pretty clear to me it's not exactly the same case, because in the case here, in that Radam is citing the 19th century case, there is very clear warning, right? The rabbi says to the man, and I would assume, I think it only makes sense. He says it not only to the man, but he says it to the daughter. He says it to the sister. He says, look, this guy is a trickster. He's just planning to take your money. And they say, you know what, we're accepting the risk. So it is a given, right, that you can't undo a sale if you know the risks, if a known risk turns out to happen anyway. Right? Because all sales are made under risk, right? You can't say, I bought this cow on condition that it wouldn't die crossing the road being hit by a car a day later, because you know that's a risk, but you assume the risk. You can't retroactively undo it because of something that you knew about and accept the risk, right? Even though it wasn't what you wanted to have happen. So this has no comparison at all on on the surface at least, to the case that we have here, where in our case, the woman doesn't accept that risk and accept, I guess, in the sense that all people getting married assume the risk that their spouse has some kind of hidden criminal history. So that this woman accepted the risk tells you nothing about whether, in a standard case, you should assume that women are accepting such a risk. So there are two weird things about this tshuva. One is this is a very odd basis for rejecting the claim of Mekachtos. Very odd basis at all, right? This story, which doesn't seem quite so analogous. And then there's Rabbi Levin's tshuva, which was really odd, which just ends b'tzarach iyun. And and what kind of tshuva is that? That's a very odd thing. So you're not going to engage in my utterly wild speculation, and then we'll go on and do the really fun part of the tshuva. The utterly wild speculation is that sometime later, in 2014, I believe, the author of the first part of this tshuva, Ram Dov Levin, forms an ad hoc beit din. He seems no longer to be a member of the Rabbanut system at this point, with two other rabbis, Rav David Bigman and Rav Michal Abraham, who are not usually his ideological soulmates, and they publish a responsum to permit a woman to remarry, even though the official beit din system has not been willing to issue her a heter. Now, at the time they released the tshuva, it seems to be a moot question, because at that point the husband has already given a get, although it seems that the get he's given is questionable. But start to see the analogies to the case cited by Rabbi Dom. And here's the thing: the case that they're dealing with is a case that the case that Rabbi Levine issues the heter is a case of a young man who marries a woman and then disappears the night after the marriage with all the wedding gifts. But a lot of the other details are different, or at least there are lots of details that aren't in the story we have in the Rabbanut case. First of all, there's a question about whether he's Jewish at all, right? Because there's his mother converted, and her conversion can certainly be challenged. He himself identified as a Christian, and so it's not clear whether he could really intend to marry halachically necessarily. There are many other complications about the case. One of the things that's interesting about the case is that at least some of the rabbis who sign that heter, and actually three rabbis each writing a heter on completely different grounds. Rabbi Levine himself bases it largely, if I recall correctly, on the invalidating the conversion. But the claim is that the beit din system had mishandled the case and shown a certain amount of cowardice, because instead of simply deciding the case, they had allowed minor legal issues to hang them up, and so they ended up not making decisions, which of course the rabbis say that not making a decision is just as bad as making a decision to forbid her. And so there's, right, I think particularly in Rabbi Abraham's tshuva, there's a claim about the mistaken, the lack of shoulders, right? People who are involved in these kinds of issues, you can't say, oh, I need greater people to pass this on to. You have to make the decision yourself. That was very interesting, because here we have a case just like it, in which what does Rabbi Levine do? He does exactly that. He just leaves the case to Sarah Chiyun. So it's really very challenging. So I wonder. Okay, here this is a wild speculation with no basis. I have asked, and I have not had confirmation. In order for this to be true, it would have to be that in either the formal report of the Rabbanut or in the private tshuva issued afterwards, some details are fudged. But I wonder if it's not the same case. And if it's the same case, I wonder if Rabbi Levine's tshuva here ends b'tzarach iyun for a very particular reason. I think it's known pretty much that there is a way of gaming the Beit Din system, and the way of gaming the Beit Din system is that if you are if a majority overrules a minority, so then there's a verdict. But even if you have a 3-person panel and 2 judges vote one way and 1 judge says I can't make up my mind, so that hangs the panel. A Beit Din can't finish until all the judges issue a ruling. So in the standard way in which Beit Din function, the United States, right, where each party picks one side, and often if you in an unregulated system, each party will pick a judge who understands their job really as being your lawyer. So you always have one judge who's going to be on your side. And if that judge is corrupt, so then what he'll do is just say, if it looks like the verdict is going against him, he'll just say, okay, I can't make up my mind. And that way, the person who has the corrupt judge can never lose. So in practice, you should only go to a Beit Din that requires you to sign a formal arbitration agreement in advance. And part of the arbitration agreement will say, because you're allowed to do this, is to stipulate that the Beit Din can reach a verdict even if one of the judges refuses to reach a decision. So we stipulate against this possibility. But it remains the case on the books that there is no ruling, even if a majority of the judges reach a decision, as long as one of them says, I can't make up my mind. So with that, my speculation is, crazy speculation, is that in the case in front of us, Rav Levine made it very clear what his decision would be, but realized that he did not have a majority of his panel. And so if he allowed his panel to go to a vote, there would be a precedent on the books that had ruled that this aguna could not be freed, certainly not by Mekach arguments, and maybe not at all. And so he maybe deliberately hung the court, and ended it b'tzarach iyun, so that he could come back later and form a private Beit Din and issue a heter without having to go against precedent, just claiming, you know what, the previous court, even though it included him, was too cowardly to make up its mind, and now we get to make our decision. It's possible it's a different case, and that it's just after the Rabbi was free, and he had a whole list of cases. Some of you who had misbegotten youths like me might remember that there was once a truly terrible television show called Hardcastle and McCormick. Don't raise your hand if you know about it. Which involved, the conceit of it, aside from lots of fast cars, the conceit of it was that there was a judge who was really a stickler for law, and so he had to let a whole bunch of criminals off on technicalities. But once he retired, he was going to go off and track all those criminals down again if they had ever committed a crime. They ever committed a crime again. So maybe Rabbi Levine, I'm not sure if it was Levin, or I think it was Levin, but maybe it was Levine, who I think is no longer with us. Was nifter, I'm not sure. I think that another possibility is that he just had a list of the kinds of cases that had enormously frustrated him when he was in the Beit Din system, and so when he retired, he set out, if he found other cases like them, he would correct them. So that's my wild speculation about what happened. You can take it or not. What I want to do with the remaining time, and I'll take questions about everything at the end. And as always, I'll stay as long as necessary to answer questions. I want to do the tshuva that Rabbi Dam cited, and I don't know, if I were really extreme, I'd say Rabbi Dam cited it to show that how absurd he thought the whole argument of Mekach was. But I really don't know enough about that. I am grateful to him for having sent me to this tshuva. So I'm just going to read along the whole narrative with you, and then at the end of it, the question I want to ask you to ask yourself is, I guess the only question is, like, how much of this narrative was necessary for the tshuva? And if a lot of this narrative is not necessary for the tshuva, you'll see it's a lot more than what Rabbi Dam cited. So what is its purpose? So here's the narrative. Story happened as follows. In the year 5650, this is Rabbi Moshe Shimon Zivitz writing, a man came to me from New York by the name of Shabtai Fronovitz. And he asked me to be his friend. He came to me to the Karvo, right? Not to make me friend, but to be my friend, right? To be close to me. And in the process, he gave me a letter from a Rav who I know, right, who's famous, Rav Meir Ficus, and they're both alums of the yeshiva in Slobodka, which is the yeshiva, the great yeshiva of the time. And the letter writes, "Avakesh rachmin ba'ad avrecha yakar," etc. Right. All right. So I asked you to show favor to this young man. So I said to him, "Come with me, and I'll buy you merchandise on credit, and you go be a peddler, and may God be with you." But he says to me, "Chalila, God forbid, I didn't come to you with a letter from a rabbi so he would give me money. All right, I have $2 in my wallet, and that will be enough for me to buy and go to go sell. Just the only thing is, every day I am just so exhausted from business that it's hard for me to learn. So what I want from you is I want you to have a chavrusa of me every day. That's all I want from you, right, out of this friendship." And it happened, and I learned with him every day when he comes home, right? But it's obvious, that he's not making a lot of money, and he barely been able to feed himself. But now all of a sudden we discover that he's constantly groaning. Why? Because he has a wife and a daughter, and he can't send them anything. He can barely support himself, not his wife and daughter. He still won't take any money. And so many times we tried to give him help, but he refused to accept help. And now what happens? His father-in-law sends his sister here to to her family, and says, "I want you, my relatives, and I want him to divorce my daughter." And his relatives come to me with Rosh Shabtai, and his wife is standing at his hand, and his daughter was only 2 years old, right? She's holding on to her father's hand. I asked the wife, "Why are you coming to me?" And she says, "I want to accept." Right, the second and third person are always shifting this narrative. I put it in quotes, but it's framed in eventually in third person. "I came here to get divorced." So I said, "Why do you want to get divorced?" And she said, she said, "My husband can't support me." And her husband, this Rav Shabtai, says, "Cain, yes, right? He's holding his 2-year-old daughter's hand. It's really hard for me to be separate. But this poor woman is starving, right, suffering the shame of hunger. Oh, how great! Alas, I can separate." Amartilo. So I said to him, "Yedidi, my friend," this is Rabbi Sevet speaking. The two of you come tomorrow towards evening. But if Torah they get, we'll write you a get, because even though it's very sad, you both want it. But I, Bezrat Hashem, with God's help and with the help of all the kosher slaughterers in town, Asafnu $30. We collected $30. Remember, he had $2 in his wallet. And we rented them a house, or rented them a place to live. And the next day towards evening, I saw it was fully furnished. Like burgers, like really, like middle class people. And they were stocked. Their pantry was stocked for 30 days. The kasher bo late Erev, when they come back the next evening, we said, "You know what? We got to go somewhere else for the get." And we take them to the apartment. So when they come into the room, as they're walking in, they think they're there for the divorce. Their faces turn white, like people being taken to jail. And but we all come, and like 20 people there, and there's a set table, and we eat and we drink, and we tell them, "All right, you can join in, I guess." When it comes time to bench, we tell Reb Shabtai, "Here, you lead benching." And then then we tell them the secret. This is your apartment. And we give the woman the $30. That Rosh Shabtai now tinokos. And guess what? Not only that, we found him a job as a teacher in the local elementary school. And we found out that this woman was a sheitel macher. We found her a job too. And all of a sudden the man starts to live. And he sees great life with the woman he loves. And nowadays he's worth $30,000 Americanim. Now he has $30,000 in cash. Okay, great. Now we're all that is completely missing from Rabbi Dam's narrative. Now we go into Rabbi Dam's narrative. Right, this Shabtai has a sister. Her name is Sprinza, and she has an English name, Hedda, and she serves in the house of this man in Boston. Right, but that was also missing, I think, from Rabbi Dam's narrative. And she has these $300 in her Shabtai things, and he gives them to me to do the chasadim, and then the story, and then the whole story happens with the son-in-law, showing up. Except we missed the story. We missed part of the story. Let's pick it up, right? So I tell her Shabtai, you better check after this guy, because in my eyes, he's one of the wicked people who spread their nets. They all say goodbye. They leave the house together. And a day later, Rav Shabtai comes to me and he says, all my relatives are claiming that you stole my sister's money, you don't have it. And you know what? It's true, right? Because he didn't ever expect it to be called in at a moment's notice, so it seems. And as soon as I heard this, I ran immediately to the short-term lenders, right? So Rabbi Zivitz apparently, right, is probably racking up money on his credit card here. But he doesn't want his integrity credited, so he goes and borrows the money, it seems, and puts the money in and brings the money out for him. And I tell him, I think reading between the lines, the reason you're saying this is because your son-in-law wants to make sure that your wife's money is in his hands, so that when he abandons her right after the wedding, he'll have money. I tell him, you better be careful. Right? I'm telling you that your sister's going to be left in Aguna by this man. But okay, he overpowered, right? So that detail about the money is missing from Dam's routine. And then he tries, as we said, to fake the wedding by using invalid witnesses, and he can't do it. And now, all gone. Okay, what happens after all gone? Now days and months pass, as we said, right? And and his sister is crying to Rav Shabtai, why didn't you listen to Rabbi Zivitz's warning? What does he do? Well, he apparently doesn't think of hiring detectives, or it doesn't work, but he also does skulot rabot. He goes to lots of rabbis and he asks them for supernatural aid, some way, to force God, or to force the husband to give the get in some way that other than, even if you don't know where he is. He goes to lots of rabbis or miracle workers, and one of them says, do this. And one of them says, do this. And he does everything they tell him to do. None of it does any good, and the husband is still missing, and the sister is still in Aguna. But when he realizes he has nothing else to do, then he finally comes back to me, because you can imagine it's kind of humiliating for Rabbi Shabtai to show up and ask this rabbi for help, because this is the rabbi who told him, right, you're an idiot, this man's going to leave your daughter in Aguna, what were you doing? Your sister in Aguna, what are you doing? And he finally shows up at my house and he cries and he says, hello, Rav Yisrael Kichvodo, like a rabbi in Israel like you, the chief rabbi of Pittsburgh. Why haven't you given me a skula so that her husband will come and divorce her? If I'm guilty, why should my sister suffer from my sins? I think the correct text here we have, right? The text here is sachakti, but I think it should be tzakti. Right? I cried. I called him a complete idiot 2 or 3 times. The who and the text we have is bechad, but I think it has to be bacha. But he cried and said, right, with an oath, Chayani meitzemikan, by Hashem, if I'm going to leave here, lo azuz bimkomi, I'm not going to leave this space. Right, try the Chonim Magil thing. Right, I'm not going to leave the space. Bilti mitains skula biadi lifol alav shishlach lo get free to it. I need you to give me some kind of supernatural power that will force the husband to give the get wherever he is. Okay. Rav says, look, I'm not going to hide this from you. My soul desired to make fun of him a little bit. And I said that I would give him, right, that would give him a school of and he would get nothing out of it. It's not sure whether he's clear that whether he said this is what he said in his heart, right? I know if I decided I would give him a school, but not one that would help him, or he said to him, look, I'll give you a school, but it's not going to help. What did he do? He says, Lakachti iti, so I took my pen. The katafti tefillah arukah, I wrote a long prayer. The tochen of tefillah haya, Hashem yitbarach yiteni lo v'lo sheyishlach lo get to it. Right? In the end, it said, may God put in the mind of this husband to give me to give her a get. Now I say to Reb Shabtai, you better memorize this tefillah. Right, you have to take this, the written version, now that you memorized it, and put it in your chumash. And it should be facing up to Parshas Kitetse, which has the pasuk right again, the Katav LaSefer Kritus. And put the chumash in the aron, right, with the Sefer Torah in shul. And between 1 and 2 in the morning, I think it's in the morning. Yavosham, come to shul. And put your head in the aron. Okay, and say this tefillah, right? Crying. Say this tefillah that I forced you to memorize. And I said, look, this is nonsense, but he's not going to do it. And then but then he has to leave my house, right? I'm going to gain, right? Because he's going to have to leave my house because I gave him a skula, and he won't do it. So what's the big deal? But I was wrong. Didn't happen that way. A couple of weeks pass, and guess what? Rav Shabtai gets caught as a thief in the night in the shul. Because why are you coming into shul 1 o'clock in the morning? Everyone assuming he's there, and not only that, you're going into the aron, right? So what would you assume if somebody shows up in shul at 1 o'clock in the morning and sticks their head in the aron? They're trying to steal the silver. So everybody thinks Rav Shabtai is a thief. And I asked him, how did you get caught as a why would you get caught as a thief? And he said, look, I'm just doing what you told me to do. But he says it's hard because everywhere I go, people are watching me because they think I'm a thief. Right? So this is very hard for me to take. But nonetheless, he says, even though now I have occurred communal shame because people think I'm a thief, I am not stopping. And every night I go to shul, right? I go to shul to ask for my sister to get a divorce. Okay, so now Rabbi Zivitz doesn't know what to do. He's doing it. What to do? So a few days after this, or months, whatever it is, whatever Yamim means. Cleveland. So I am leaving Pittsburgh for Cleveland. And I stay there for 2 weeks. I come home. As my legs step on the threshold. And my wife comes out to give me the great news. Kiva get picturing Rav Shabtai. Rav Shabtai's sister's get is here. Baltimore. And so the get comes from Baltimore, and it has a letter, and here's what it says. A man came to me and he said he can't rest because he knows that he left a woman in Aguna in Pittsburgh, and his spirit throbs in his internals so much that he can't that he can find no peace for his soul during the day, and at night he can't rest. And so he's begging the rabbi, you must write me a get for my wife in Pittsburgh. Right, so look, the skula worked, right? This is that Rabbi Zivitz gave a skula and he thought he was joking, and he thought it would never happen, but it happens, and it leads to public humiliation, and now there's a get. So he sends it, right? Everything should end happily now. So he sends a message. So the rabbi in Baltimore hurriedly sends a message to me. Send me the name of the woman so I can write the get. But remember, Rabbi Zivitz says in Cleveland. I wasn't home, so my wife got the message. So Shalcha Ishto Achar Ish Muflag Iro. I may have got it right. I think it should be Ishti, but it could be Ishto. So either the rabbi in Baltimore's wife or the right, or the wife of Rabbi Zivitz. I in the English version I wrote this week, I wrote as Rabbi Zivitz's wife. Maybe I'm wrong. V'hu katavet shema shprinsa de miskarya eta. Right, and so the scribe in Baltimore wrote the name of Rav Shabtai's sister, Shprinza, who is called Etta. Bechalif Shem Etta al Shem Heda. But he got the name wrong, and it says her English name wasn't Etta, her English name was Heda. The Chasher Yeshafti l'sader get. So now I, Rabbi Zivitz, I have the get. He sent it back to me, and I'm trying to arrange the get. Sheltia et Shema. So I ask, right, I go to the proper form, and I say, right, what's your name? And she says, my name is Heda. Vanuchel, and this criminal Kfar Zavadir Baltimore, right? He's already gone from Baltimore. Ma'uchal asod b'zeh. What am I going to do? Well, I guess he could give Rav Shabtai another skula, but that doesn't seem like he really believes the supernatural things works really well. So Amarti, asaderet to get. So I said, I'm going to arrange the get. And I'll have the man's agent from Baltimore give her the get, or maybe it could be the man in Baltimore appointed a shliach in Pittsburgh. And then after I give the get, Esh'alat Pia Ravago and Rashki Bahag, Rabban Shal Kol Bnei Hagolah, Raman Rabbi Yitzchak V'chanan Mikavna, Bezoti Chubato. Right. So I said at the end of the story, I would ask Rabbi Yitzchak V'chanan for his opinion, and this is Rabbi Yitzchak V'chanan's tshuva. Okay, we get Rabbi Yitzchak V'chanan's tshuva. Right, Rabbi Yitzchak V'chanan's tshuva is just about a woman who is called Heta. He has Heta instead of Heda, which is a little bit confusing to me. If you pronounce Heda really rapidly, they sound the same. But on the other hand, usually you would distinguish between Hedda and Hetta. So the T's and D's are very hard to pull about. So he writes a get, right? Isha shnikres Heta v'chasvu beget Etta, and then there's a secondary issue which is not a issue. Right? He writes the tshuva to Rav Yaakov Yosef of New York. So it means that Rabbi Zivitz really sent it to Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef sent it to Rabbi Yitzchak V'chanan, so it seems. And he says, right, I got your letter through yet another party, and you asked me to talk about this, right? To talk about this question, right? So Rabbi Yaakov Yosef sent it to Rabbi Yitzchak V'chanan, even though I guess Rabbi Zivitz was looking for someone to send it to him, right? About this get that is asked by the rabbi of Pittsburgh, the Shema Ish Heta, right? He has it as Heta. The Chasvu beget Etta, right? And right, that's the issue. And Rabbi Yitzchak V'chanan writes a really astounding tshuva. Says that there is a famous case of a woman who is right, who's right. There are people named Sarah, and there's a nickname which is Saraka. And the question, what happens if somebody is called Saraka? Right, that's the name she's given at birth instead of Sarah. But when it comes time for the get, they assume that if her name is Saraka, that's just a nickname, and really her name is Sarah. So they write Sarah by mistake instead of Saraka. So there's a position that says that that's okay as long as right, imiyum kataf Sarah, afilu biyadua shema risa sarka. If you write Sarah, even though everyone in the end you discover that her name at birth was unquestionably Saraka, kasher is fine. Kevan da kol nekuda achat. So kol nekuda achat seems to mean that they have the same vowels. So you can recognize that Sarka is just a nickname for Sarah, and really Sarah and Sarka are the same name. That's a radical position. Right? It's another one of Al's Guta as opposed to Gutlin. Right? And which, okay, again, we're talking about names that are similar. It's not clear whether Heta and Etta have the same relationship, and even whether Heta and Heda are necessarily the same thing. But Rabbi Yitzchak says, it seems to me, right, even though initially he said, I thought initially that all the doors of Heta were excluded here, because this seems like a classic case of changing her name. In the end, I realized, no, it's just like this case. And look, Heta and Etta have the same vowels, and Etta is even part of Heta, so people should be able to figure out that Etta is really Heta, and so he kashers again. Okay, that's the whole story. Now, my thing is that you would never have gotten any of this from Rabbi Dum's citation. Rabbi Dum's citation makes it, it's a fairly straightforward case. There's it looks like it's the same thing. There's a trickster. He runs off after the wedding. They don't mention Nekachtos, and and so they don't mention Nekachtos. They must think it's not an option. So already pointed out that's not really the case because it's a key point. Although Richard Dumb does mention that he warned him, right? So they deliberately accepted the risk. So my question is, how much more do you understand? Right, this is an incredibly rich narrative, right, with amazing twists and turns, right, and heroic interventions, right, and there's suspense moments, and there are places where different parties have knowledge, right, because you don't tell them, they don't walk in for the divorce, and you tell them, oh look, we're going to prevent you from divorcing because we're giving you lots of money. You take them thinking they're going to the divorce, and then you run a meal, right, for just delaying purposes, like Esther's first Suda, and it's only at the end of the meal that you tell them that really this is all for you, right, which is similar to another famous story, right, where you mechabed the husband, and that's how you prevented it with a party, and that's how you give them the divorce. And you have the irony that I gave him a skula, which I didn't think would work. I was just making fun of him, but it does work. You have the whole background of the issue where where Rav Shabtai becomes rich through his help and then demands the money back, and forces him to borrow money. All this flourishes. So that'll leave you with a question, right? Why does Rabbi Zivitz write such a long, detailed tshuva? Does it affect anything halachically? If it doesn't affect anything halachically, so why would he write it? And is there anything you can learn from here about the way in which either Rabbi Yochanan or Avram Dov Levine or Rabbi Dam approach Aguna cases? I'm gonna say one thing. Actually, you know what? Let's first take a moment and tell me what you think. Right? What is this whole? I hope you enjoyed it. And what do you think this trip is about? Why are all these? Why is Rabbi Zivitz's question so much longer than Rabbi Dum's citation? Somebody? Yes, Seth. Seth, I can't hear you. Yeah.
Hang on.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Okay, I mean the stories are very different, especially. So one thing is that in terms of Mekach Taut, for example, the experience in the long version, with I think a rich person, the Rosh Hashanah is rich now. I mean, the 300 is nothing compared to his wealth. He's a successful person. So, you get to knowing what you're getting into versus the first story. I got the impression that no one knew what was going, they were just tricked. So they're very different. In the second story, did they both come out well in the end in both stories? I don't even remember.
No, I mean in the story, the original story, right? We'll call the 19th century story. I guess the husband gets off with the money, and the wife eventually gets divorced. She has. I guess she comes out okay, except she had a bad marriage experience. In the second case, the husband gets off with the money, and the wife is stuck as an aguna. Right, the Beit Din isn't not to her. She's just trapped. No miracles.
Right. Okay. So I guess, yeah, I don't really understand. I don't know anything more, so I can't really say any more about. But they're tremendously different. They just get the feeling of obviously very different kinds of cases, and whether who you sympathize with. Anyway, all right. I guess I'll leave it at that because that's my ignorance level.
Well, I think they were all. It's tough to know. I think that you're right that that the sympathy in Reb Zivitz's story is very different. And what you get, I think the biggest shift is Rabbi Dum's citation sounds like, well, of course we would have used mekachtos. We have this forced device for a get, and really, you read the tshuva, what it sounds like is, right, and I think this is correct, that nobody uses mekachtos if they have a get. And by the time, and I think that it's right, by the time, I guess what I'm really interested in is how should Rabbi Yochanan react to this whole long story? Does he react to it by saying, well, look, she knew what she was getting into and it's her fault? Or do you react by saying, oh my goodness, this poor woman, got bamboozled by her lunatic brother. But we don't want to blame her lunatic brother. Her lunatic brother is obviously a tzaddik, but her brother is a tzaddik, but he's the kind of, I often think, right, tzaddikim are dangerous, right? He's the kind of tzaddik who, right, you can't deny his dedication, but his dedication is the kind that leaves his wife and daughter to starve in Europe because he won't take charity. But he's at least living, and they're suffering, right? They're suffering from hunger, and he has enormous sympathy for her, but not enough to take tzedakah. They have to trick him into taking tzedakah. And he's a generous man, but he's also somebody who can be driven by the heat of the moment to force his rabbi who saved him from poverty, and who actually it doesn't say poverty. His rabbi who learned with him for all this time, he listens to all the suffering, and he's willing to put him on the right. Eventually, I guess we're going to say that, right? He's willing to put him, in a really awkward position and convey suspicions. I think what you get is that it's not the sister's fault, but these are also not people who are scamming you in any way, right? These are people who are good people who we should try to rescue, and it might be, if there was no get, I guess it's clear that Rabbi that I think would agree that Mekach Teleshos wasn't the case here because they accepted the risk explicitly. So I think that's probably right. That you get out of sympathy here is you get a lot of sympathy for the sister, and understanding of how she got into it, and the way she got into it is not because her family is bad people; they're all trapped. But the other really interesting thing, of course, is that Rabbi Zivitz comes out as a hero. Right, he's the one who saves the marriage. He's the one who warns them about it. He's even the one who, right, this marvelous situation, who gives the schooler that works, even though he doesn't believe in schoolers. So it could be that the whole letter is a really important part of the rest. Just say whatever the case, right? You have to understand the whole case to know what's going on, and a dumb citation creates a false parallel by not really realizing what is going on, and in this letter. The other possibility is that everyone knows you send a letter to Rav Yitzchak Hanan with an aguna. If there's any possibility for a heter, you're going to get a heter. That's his job, right? He's avihan shel agunot. He was, I don't know which one how you deal with the relative stature of such great figures, but for lack of a better term, he was the Rav Avadia of his day. Right? All the aguna shilas went to him, and you knew that if there was any way at all, he would be the one to give the heter, and he didn't need a sob story. He just needed somebody to say, "This is an aguna, and you're the one who can free her, so please do." Could be that. In that case, so why does Rabbi Zivitz write this? So the other thing I'm going to say, right? This is the other wild possibility. There are questions in the Shleidu Shuvot Chavot Yair, which are this kind of drama in them. And in the Chavot Yair, I suspect, and I'm not the first one to suspect it, that those are all Shuvot that he wrote the case, and they're often Shuvot in which the details of the case are fundamentally irrelevant to the halacha. Right, the case I've talked about is where where the daughter of the richest man in town falls ill and with a contagious disease, and nobody's willing to nurse her. So one of the serving boys says, "I will nurse her, but you have to let me marry her." And he nurses her, and of course he nurses her back to health. And then the father says, "Ha! I just said that so you would nurse her, right? You're not really going to get to marry her." But then the boy falls sick with the same contagious disease or the different contagious disease, and no one agrees to nurse him. But she, of course, says, "Well, he nursed me. I have to nurse him." And now they really fall in love, and the parents threaten to cut her off. And now we have a debate about how much money he owes the couple. And it's not the details of the case are not what matters legally. It's really it's a question of whether he promised or not. But the story is fascinating. There are enough cases like this in the Chavot Yair that you have to wonder whether he wrote the cases because it was an outlet. Right? It was a way of writing a kind of fiction, for lack of a better word, imaginative narrative, that he didn't otherwise have an option. There is a wild opinion that claims that he had an ideological purpose in arguing for romantic love as opposed to arranged marriage. I find that unconvincing because, as I found other cases, and the other cases are not about that, so I don't think that can be it at all. So the other possibility is Rabbi Sivitz told a great story, and this was his occasion to write the story well. Maybe he just enjoyed telling great stories. He did write, wonderful drasha with Mishalim. The Chaim and I learned one of them yesterday afternoon. He definitely was a great public speaker. Or at least he writes great speeches that you can tell delivered competently would be really effective in public. I haven't read his commentary on the Yerushalmi. I have seen some of the other shilas he asked people, and he was certainly extremely clever. So I wonder whether the whole narrative is there just because he enjoyed writing it, or whether, but it has an effect. Even if he just didn't write it, changes the way in which we look at it. It's an enormously rich portrait. And there are things that will stay for me, like the idea of the Rav who doesn't believe his skula is writing the skula to make the person go away, and then the skula works, and now what does he do? That's just a great classic trope, in all sorts of fiction. So I'll leave that to you. But I hope you enjoyed the story at least. And I think the idea we had in the first place about what Rabbi Levin was doing, and then in the end, right, we really, another layer of irony. If Rabbi Levin deliberately said, I don't know what to do with this case because he was preserving it later, and then the other member of the Beit Din that resolved the case later, attacks the Beit Din for not making up his mind. That would be a really interesting irony. As I say, I have not confirmed it yet. I also have asked one of the Dayanim involved. It has not been denied either. So I leave it. So at this point, neither confirmed nor denied that it was the same case. Okay. Thank you as always. Are there any other questions? All right then. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you either in shul or next Thursday night.
Shabbat shalom.